Hello, my name is Sage, and you may or may not know me as Candy Eggs. If you do, you are probably familiar with my insatiable, incessant prattlings about dinosaurs. You can tell it's a special day today because I handcrafted this new, more realistic PNG to puppet around. My brain is entirely swamped with dinosaurs, Homestuck, and every single Pokemon ever made, but today I have finally decided to review the first episode of Planet Dinosaur. Wait, I mean Dinosaur Planet. No, that's still not right. I mean Dinosaur Planet. Wait, Prehistoric Planet. No, sorry, Prehistoric Planet. Before we get too far into it, let's peruse the old Wikipedia for some fun facts. Now, I should clarify, I am not a paleontologist, nor am I a professional paleo artist. If anything, I'm a cartoonist who just also likes and draws dinosaurs. I am anything but a music person, so I'll say that the soundtrack was apparently composed by Hans Zimmer, Andrew James Christie, Kara Talv, and Anze Rosman. They did a fantastic job as far as I'm concerned, though I will admit that nothing hit quite as hard to me as did the song from Weird Allosaurus, the movie. But my brain is literally too smooth to appreciate music this complex, so say the beat. I've already managed to compare Prehistoric Planet to BBC's Walking with Dinosaurs, but it's not my fault that they chose to use the name of the DVD box set I have. Have I emphasized enough that I hate the naming conventions of Dinosaur Mania? Perhaps I do need to clarify that I'm talking about walking with dinosaurs, not walking about talking with dinosaurs. Anyways, Prehistoric Planet was produced by Mike Gunton, who also produced This Thing I Like, and Jean Favreau, who made This Thing I Like, as well as this thing, which could have been good if it wasn't one-to-one with the source material. He also directed Zafara! This lineup is looking fantastic so far. I'm a big fan of Favreau's eye for visual expression. Meanwhile, Gunton and Zimmer are sure to bring the classic animal documentary feel and approach that Walking with Dinosaurs cemented as the most effective and approachable balance between spectacle, education, and realism. To top it all off, they got Sir David Attenborough, the world-renowned voice of Baby Turtle Culling himself, to narrate the project. What could possibly go wrong? Okay, so for clarification, most of my gripes with this series are about the designs and animations of the reconstructed animals. Darren Naish, 1/3 of all yesterdays, alongside John Conway and the coffee sip man himself, Chef Mehmet Kosemen, is the lead paleontology consultant. I've noticed a lot of misrepresentation of his role on the show. He didn't write the whole show and surely didn't have as much control over the project as I would have liked. Projects like this are almost entirely made by people who know almost nothing about dinosaurs and only know how to produce or 3D model or do special effects. This is why most of my gripes exist. It's not really the fault of anything but deadlines and corporate stuff. So, I'm about to rant about a lot of things that only matter to mega nerds like me, but beware that issues like this aren't the fault of laziness and certainly aren't the fault of specific paleontology consultants. Jellyfish Pictures did a fantastic job, all things considered, even though I do have a few bones to pick, but my criticisms are in pursuit of a hypothetical perfect documentary, and for sharing neat things I've learned while researching for my own paleo art, not to spite anyone who worked on this project. I will probably ham up my reactions for the rants and for the funny, but remember that this is all just in the fun of admiring animals that we will never actually be able to see. Without further ado, let's get into Prehistoric Planet, Episode 1.
Surely, one of the baby turtles.
We start off the episode with Attenborough giving the Charizard treatment to Tyrannosaurus Alan. Right off the bat, I do have to admit that upon rewatch, the wah 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 of the main theme does hit hard. The song coming into its own is almost like the music itself is being brought to life alongside the animals. So, Sir David Dinosaur is introducing the classic questions. What did dinosaurs look like? How did they dinosaur? Iconic questions that 5-year-olds and nerds think about constantly, but this actually spurs one of my biggest criticisms of the series as a whole. The idea that paleontology has progressed so far that we do have the answers, all of the answers, which is just a hilariously unfortunate pitfall that every one of these documentaries falls into. The new research is so accurate and good that this is completely perfect selling point, which is and always will become outdated. Designs in this are outdated even before it was announced. A lot of people blindly believe these kinds of statements, which is unfortunate because this is exactly where paleo art trends come from. Things that are entirely made up, but keep being put into designs enough that it seems like something correct. We'll get into this later on, but I've had enough people call me out for making paleo art wrong just because I don't follow made-up trends based on nothing. And certain very popular paleo artists, while I respect the grind, don't put nearly enough research into their restorations and only fuel these trends. We then get into some very hype sneak peeks at future scenes and episodes. Attenborough also clarifies the gimmick of this series. Everything takes place at the same time, 66 million years ago. One of my favorite parts about this show is how much of the footage is shot as if an actual film crew was set out into the past, equipped with all the cameras, lenses, and all the fake audio they could possibly need. I am sorry to tell you that basically all of the audio in nature documentaries is done after the fact. Animals are, in fact, very far away. Anyways, I'll point out specific shots I enjoy as we progress. Episode 1 focuses on coastal animals, which is a very interesting subversion to the way these dinosaur documentaries normally start out, taking full advantage of their setting, committing to 66 million years ago. We avoid the typical Triassic, early Jurassic episode and get right into the Tyrannosaurus pandering. This is actually a very smart move, as in life, the Hell Creek Formation was coastal, and if it were still alive, T-Rex would probably be an iconic beach-themed animal. Back on track, introducing Tyrannosaurus with a footprint that immediately gets washed away by the surf is a beautiful bit of storytelling, hitting home that almost nothing about these animals' lives remains as evidence today. Their tracks in sand are as fleeting as yours or mine would be as the tide comes to erase it. Revealing the Tyrannosaurus swimming in the ocean is a fantastic hook. After leading with this being the most accurate restoration of dinosaurs, this scene is instantly striking and confusing. Because of its popularity, Tyrannosaurus is often represented as the dinosaur, trademarked, and not as the uniquely specialized creature it is. Everyone I forced to see this with me when it first came out had to ask me if this was even possible for T-Rex to swim. Yes, many dinosaurs actually have a ton of air inside of them, and there is also a paper that showed that most theropods were very floaty, directly comparable to birds like emu, who enjoy swimming for fun, apparently. Look at them go. Interestingly, sauropods have such highly pneumaticized bones, air bones, that they float extremely well, and ornithischians, who lack the fancy air bones, were comparable to mammals, some of which were dense enough to not have a very fun time in water. I also wanted to point out that T-Rex's nose is moving. Although it's quoted that reptiles don't have muscular noses like mammals, crocodilians and at least some squamates can close their noses when necessary. Not all birds can, but I suppose it's reasonable to assume dinosaurs could, although it should probably commit to keeping them open or closing them for realism. I really appreciate the T-Rex swimming with a combination of its legs and tail, since the caudofemoralis muscle, which connects the thigh to the tail to help power the leggies, does move automatically when the legs do. Basically, what I'm saying is that this is how they swim, and that's cool. Infinitely better than the Walking with Dinosaurs Eustreptospondylus swim, which haunts my nightmares. We're not even 3 minutes in and I've already put this much into the script. I hope this is what you're here for. Baby T-Rex, making baby noises. While dinosaurs were more than capable of closed-mouth vocalizations, there's no evidence that says they can't make normal open-mouth noises. The open-mouth sounds would have been a lot higher pitched than the closed-mouth ones, as seen here. The male parent leading the babies is also a neat touch, as many birds have males heavily involved in baby care. In my favorite birds, the trumpeters, males are significantly more dutiful to chicks than are females. In emus, the females don't do much of anything after making the eggs. Based emus. Meanwhile, megapodes don't have either parent really doing anything. The babies just come out of the ground like sea turtles. That's fun. As the camera pans below the surface, we get our first look at the protostagid. The sense of scale here is kind of ruined without a good human-sized reference, but we did just see Attenborough next to a skeleton. Jurassic Park does kind of ruin the size of dinosaurs, making real ones look pretty dinky in comparison. Nonetheless, it's far from the worst protostagid I've seen. It does look generally odd just because its face is so thin and long, being even more exaggerated than even today's hawksbill turtles, while simultaneously having a strikingly wide and flat body. While this doesn't really help the everything in the past was bigger than today myth, it does lend itself nicely to the next creature revealed. Tyrannosaurus was specified to be the largest land predator earlier, and the payoff for that came remarkably quick. Mosasaurus is, at this time on Earth, the largest carnivore on the planet. That we know of. From enough material to be confident in. Pointing out that it is literally a lizard is also a nice touch that's often lost in paleomedia. As much a lizard as is this, or this, or this. Yes. The T-Rex looking underwater is a bit odd. I feel like it would have been more suspenseful and more realistic to have a view from right on the surface of the water behind the father's head where you can just see the Mosasaurus surfacing. Seeing the father's eye go wide and track to the side a little would really put you into the scene as one of the babies. Just use a lens that implies the camera is far away, i.e. one with little distortion. Little improvements like these just make me wish I could get my grubby little mitts on a project like this. So that's one on the baby death counter. Wouldn't be an Attenborough project without it. It'll be funny to keep track of this. Let's do that. The textures look gorgeous in this series. It's good to see scales be both three-dimensional and range in size and shape across the body. Speaking of which, this series seems to be in support of the idea that baby Tyrannosaurids were fluffy while adults weren't. Now, we do have a couple skin impressions from Tyrannosaurus itself, and they suggest that it didn't have any feathers at all. It's also necessary to clarify that Eutyrannus isn't a Tyrannosaurid, it's a Tyrannosauroid, so its feathers hold much less weight in this conversation. Especially considering that Eutyrannus was found very far north in the Liaoning province of China in an entirely different environment to Tyrannosaurus, which again was coastal, subtropical, and fluvial. I do like how it clearly shows that Tyrannosaurus has feathers in between its scales, like many birds have on their feet. Ostriches are often referenced in this fluffy baby argument, but ostriches lose their feathers in the wake of bare skin. This elephant-like, or even human-like, sparse feathering is exactly what you'd expect if the babies were fluffy and grew to lose most of their feathers. I do also want to point out that a recent find of a juvenile Gorgosaurus has gut contents, which suggests that they weren't cared for by adults, at least when approaching the sizes shown here, with the Gorgosaurus preying specifically on baby Oviraptorosaurs. There's a reason Oviraptorosaurs are such good parents, and it's because rude smalls keep making their babies die all the time. Tyrannosaurids undergo ontogenetic niche partitioning. What that means is that juveniles and adults hold different niches in their ecosystem to prevent adults from outcompeting smalls. Tyrannosaurus is a very long-legged runny boy for most of its life before pretty abruptly widening and taking on prey we normally associate the animal with, like Triceratops and Edmontosaurus. We know that Tyrannosaurus had a quite sudden sexual maturity at this adult shape, but not yet adult size, and had only a handful of years left to make babies and grow to the sizes we expect Tyrannosaurus to be. What that means is that Tyrannosaurus would have the overwhelming majority of individuals at any time be babies and juveniles, with a tiny amount actually being the giants we think of. That's pretty neat. Hermit crabs have existed since the Jurassic, but I'm definitely starting a counter for clearly extant animals since they ruined the immersion for me. Anyways, the Tyrannosaurus family has finally reached what they've been sniffing out, a rotting turtle. Jack Horner would be proud. Jack Horner married a 19-year-old undergraduate student who volunteered at his lab. That's real. I'm serious. It's bad enough that he didn't understand ecosystems enough to argue that Ammontosaurus and Triceratops could only die of natural causes since T-Rex was clearly an obligate scavenger. You know, like a vulture. Vultures who do prey on small animals. Almost as embarrassing as the paper that claimed to discover a whole new feather type, as if they'd never seen a bird's pin feather before. I'm still not kidding. That's real too. Quote, however, both the remiges and rectrices are proximally ribbon-like in the younger specimen, but fully pennaceous in the older specimen, a pattern not known in any modern bird. I'm bringing up so many tangents that this might as well be trigonometry. Also, second, clearly extant animal. Obviously not the same turtles as before, given that they have scutes. It always makes CGI look super fake when juxtaposed with actual animals. I really wish the babies were just CGI as well. Also, look at this baby turtle death fake out directly followed by another one. I really like how the baby Tyrannosaurus returning to the father shows that the time of day and weather have changed already. That's the kind of immersion I'm here for, the implication that the camera crew has been following this animal for at least a full day for this footage. Oh, but I'm pretty sure that one is definitely a baby animal death. So many modern animals. I understand this choice, but it still takes me out of it. While this is going on, as a quick aside, my friend has been getting into the intended pronunciations of the Greek and Latin root words that many dinosaurs are named with. May I introduce you to Tyrannosaurus, the famous dinosaur? Do with that information what you will. I've already been sort of pronouncing them in this manner, but I'll be continuing to as we go on. So we've finally made our way to pterosaurs. I will preface this by saying that David Peters has made this nearly impossible to research on Google, but pterosaur range of motion. Basically, pterosaurs cannot bend their wrists anywhere near that far. A lot of artists do this, I think, in an attempt to make them look more like birds, but they aren't birds. Pterosaur wings fold at the base of the wing finger, not at the base of the wing finger and at the wrist. Birds have very special wrists that let them do that cursed thing. Some non-bird dinosaurs can fold their hands even further back than birds, like Oxoco and Oviraptorosaur. That's cool. Almost all of a pterosaur's movement in the arm comes from the shoulder and the base of the arm, not the wrist. Pterosaurs are ancestrally bipedal, and their walking is very funny because of this. Most of their weight is on their legs. This is why bipedal pterosaurs have been proposed so relentlessly in the past. And their hands basically touch the ground solely to prevent them from falling forward. They have a really unique gait, which is at least attributable to pterodactyloids, wherein the arm is raised for the entire duration of the foot's step. What I mean is that the hand is raised, the foot is raised, the foot is placed, then the hand is placed. Here's an animation I never finished demonstrating this. This is not represented in the show, and that makes me very sad. Having this wide variety of sea pterosaurs is really fun though, and this is exactly how seabirds gather in prime sitting spots. Although there were a lot of actual seabirds in the Cretaceous, which probably ought to be represented as well, I do understand the focus on more interesting animals for a paleo documentary. But again, the contrast between seabirds and sea pterosaurs would be very thought-provoking, since modern birds and bats rarely overlap in the ways that birds and pterosaurs used to. I'll come to talk about the genera shown when name dropped, but the Fosterodraco reveal is very cool. While hamming up Ashtarkids is getting really old to me, especially considering that other Ashtarcoids get absolutely shafted out of being in these things, it's a neat choice. While not very well explained, Fosterodraco is an inland pterosaur, much more ground capable than these sea dwellers, wandering directly into the rookery with zero fear. It towers over all of the salty sea friends. This bit also infers that many pterosaurs take care of their young, which is odd. Pterosaurs laid soft-shelled eggs, and marine forms probably just buried them in sand. They're born able to fly after drying off. Implying that pterosaurs less adapted to walking would lay their eggs on rocky outcrops underneath rotting seaweed is a choice. Birds nest on rocky outcrops because their babies can't fly. Marine pterosaurs, especially nyctosaurids that don't have fingers, would certainly just be laying eggs in sand and not clambering up rocks with their fingerless hands and landing over and over to pile up seaweed. As far as I know, there are no pterosaurs known to have had an egg tooth, so I guess that's fine, but the hatching babies should be wet. I don't know why that's not a common thing to know. In a perfect world, they'd be wet and holding out their little baby wings to dry. That'd be really cute. How and why are they climbing? Handless! They should just be in sand. Sand, I tell you. But anyways, they're name dropped as Alcyone, Alcyone. I actually did not bother to research this one, so we're just gonna go with alternating pronunciations. That sounds like a good plan. Pterosaurs that are super interesting, but treated as just another pterosaur here. They're nyctosaurids, marine pterosaurs that lacked hands and had immense wings and tiny legs similar to terns, except for Alcyone, which has extremely dense bones and abnormally short wings, even for normal pterosaurs. It was a puffin-like, wing-propelled, swimming pterosaur, and they did not acknowledge this. Also, I'm pretty sure the blue-faced ones from earlier are the adult Alcyone. They don't really explain why they're less land-adapted than Tethydraco.
But some types of pterosaurs are less well adapted to life on land. They have a slightly different nesting strategy.
So I wish they'd at least have shown the adult Alcyone go right for the water as the Fosterodraco swaggered in, bobbing on the surface while the other pterosaurs stood their ground. Because again, the show does say that they should be more adapted to walking on land than Alcyone. The baby swarm is endearing nonetheless, which reminds me of another pterosaur note. Pterosaur wings contain stiff structures called actinofibrils. These help support the wing and prevent the wing from flapping about. When the wing folds, the actinofibrils sort of collapse backwards as a unit, making the wing smaller when not in use. However, it probably shouldn't suck itself this far into the body as seen in bats, since bats have special elastin and muscle bundles which, to my understanding, change the shape of the wings in flight and allow them to pull the wing tightly against the body when not in use. That being said, pterosaur fossils are dead, so the in-life extent of wing retraction isn't confidently known. Pterosaurs do have vast air sacs in their wings which help them maintain an airfoil. Kind of cursed to think about, but okay. So they probably couldn't retract their wings to the extent seen in this series unless they did something cursed like burp out a giant load of air all at once. That could be neat. But again, my main gripe is the continuation of the paleo-art trend of the dumb, bendy wrists. The flock of baby Alcyone flying around looks fantastic. Their being out of focus and far away adds to the realism so much. I wish more of the establishing shots in this series were like this, instead of showing obvious modern animals with no CGI in sight. Of course, it reels me back into complaint territory by suggesting that they need to live in the forest.
They're not heading for the beach and its colony. They need to get to the mist forest that lies beyond.
Why? If they explain that they just need a place to sleep after foraging for food in the shallow water, that's fine, but it comes across like these pterosaurs, who are supposed to be bad at being on land, are only good at being on land. Although I earnestly enjoy this pterosaur segment, especially since Africa got to be represented, they really went all out with extremely fragmentary taxa. None of the pterosaurs in this episode confidently look how they were chosen to be restored. While some are forgivable, like the minimalist restorations of Alcyone and Phosphatodraco, Barbaridactylus is not excusable, especially since it takes so much focus in the episode. Barbaridactylus is also a nyctosaurid, and a very large one at that. The crest they restored it with is, however, entirely made up. It's clearly based on the pronged crest of Nyctosaurus. Nyctosaurus, standing on the ground, ignoring the crest, which was probably exclusive to males, was only about 1 foot tall. For some reason, it's constantly spread around that this animal is larger than it actually is, and I don't know why it's hilariously small. Barbaridactylus is significantly larger and known from far too sparse of remains to confidently restore its appearance. Basically, the moment a fossil of this genus isn't horrible, the show will be hilariously outdated. Its immense size could suggest that, like Pteranodon, dominant males maintained harems of modestly sized females, but making up an elaborate crest is a real no-go in my opinion. Google the genus Barbaridactylus and you'll see that most restorations copy this entirely made-up design. This is the power of paleoart trends, and I hate them. So anyways, the Barbaridactylus portrayal as something akin to frigate birds is pretty neat. With the context of following episodes, we can safely assume that these are males without harems. I really like how the babies dive closer to the water to prevent aerial predation, and how the Barbaridactylus pursue to show off their prowess on the wing. However, the wrists folding really pains me. Pterosaurs can point their wing fingers backward and their arms forward to form the same shape frigate birds make, that beautiful swooping M. Folding over their wrists like birds is something they absolutely cannot do. It might sound pedantic, but pterosaur wrists bending too far is their equivalent to Jurassic Park hands and dinosaurs. The camera follows one baby in particular before it crash lands onto the beach that this species is, again, not good enough on land to loiter around. Now we see why, as Phosphatodraco, assumedly the same one as earlier, immediately picks it off. The setup and payoff for the Ashtarkid's inclusion was done masterfully. Its little musical riff returning as soon as the Barbaridactylus' theme goes silent is fantastic. As the resident beach babes ogle baby death, we get close up on Tethys face, which leads me to another interesting fact. Some pterosaurs, at least Tupandactylus, one of those Ashtarkoids I mentioned earlier that never get to be in these documentaries, has weirdly bird-shaped feathers. They're like funhouse mirrors of what bird feathers look like and are completely independently evolved from a single or branching basal filament. That's really cool, and at least other Ashtarkoids like Phosphatodraco, which I just realized I have been saying Phosphatodraco, I cannot pronounce things, would be reasonable candidates for the funny feather treatment. Much more basal pterosaurs are known to have more specialized filaments, so I think it's safe to assume that Pteranodontians could share these fancy fluffies if the designers so chose. Eventually, some of the Alcyone make it to the mysterious woods they need to climb on with their invisible hands. The narration directly states that the forest will have all of the shelter and food they need.
This forest offers all the shelter and food that a young pterosaur needs.
But why can't they just subsist on small marine crustaceans and fish? It implies that they're going to aerially pursue insects, I guess? I suppose the thinking is that their short wings let them fly between trees, but they have been proposed to be auk-like divers, or at the very least possessing a fast-flapping, fast-flying flight style. They don't have adaptations for eating insects. This concept of forest confuses and infuriates us. There is no reason they shouldn't be dooning about in shallow water chasing ostracods or whatever else dumb idiot babies like. Transitioning towards the open sea, Attenborough specifically details that a
long
long journey is coming to an end.
end.
Meanwhile, Elasmosaur had slowly come into frame. I should not find it as funny as I do to note that, yeah, it is long. These Tyrannosaurus are moving into shallow waters to visit a specific bay. I must confide that my brain knowledge on marine reptiles is significantly less impressive than my nerddom prevailing over Adrosaurs and over Pterosaurs, but to my understanding, the way the Tyrannosaurus are swimming is valid. The presence of the tail fluke is valid, and the overall appearance is good enough. Personally, I'd add more fat onto their tails and around their necks, since plesiosaurs are known to have had blubber and would have appeared very teardrop-shaped in life. Although I can't in good faith say that Prehistoric Planet's restoration is wrong, conversely to how many paleoartists tend to work, adding less detail is often more realistic with these animals. The notable height difference in the top of the spine compared to the ribs is likely not present in life if they're anything like crocodilians. Their heads look a bit shrink-wrapped, but again, I'm not nearly as boisterous with my takes on plesiosaurs. Their displaying by driving their necks out of the water is a fun subversion on the old paleoart trope of plesiosaurs having swung curved necks held entirely out of the water. That's pretty fun. I also want to note that it's distractingly noticeable in the marine reptile segments that animals in this series don't have cloacas. Censoring animals is an odd practice, especially among reptiles where a line would suffice. Anyways, the Tyrannosaurus gather at the bay for something special. Rocks. I am legally obligated to point out that
fossils rock.
Eating rocks is something that we know plesiosaurs did, although I'm pretty sure that the episode itself explains this in the end, so I'm going to glaze over it. I'm also pretty sure that this scene is one of the only times that a CGI background is used. Also, this segment's theme of rainbows culminating in the exhale of the animals returning to deeper water was very cute. Our next segment finds us in southern Europe. We've got that modern animal counter again, but they're corals, so they really just make me realize that CGI isn't photorealistic more than distracting me. But then it kicks right off with tons of CGI fish, which I am going to assume are authentic. A Mosasaurus then emerges from the haze in front of this hapless little guy, giving an absolutely fantastic sense of scale. Scale is a problem that constantly rears its head when there are no people or buildings to compare things to, and so far this show has done a pretty good job of maintaining it. The Mosasaur's skull looks maybe a little shrink-wrapped, especially in the jaw muscles and the sunken eyes, but it's close enough. The biggest problem with the Mosasaurus in this series is their smooth cloacaless buddies. How do they poop? The Mosasaur comes to a rest, waiting for the fish to help it shed, which is a very nice touch. Calling it Hoffman's Mosasaur is also an entertaining thought, since that's literally what Mosasaurus hoffmanni's name means, just reverse engineered into a common name. Mosasaurs do have scales, recreated in loving detail here, and they also have multiple rows of teeth, as depicted. Drawing attention to the fact that mosasaurs can smell underwater with their tongues is also a great detail to include, as for some reason people don't normally acknowledge that. For context, mosasaurs are toxicoferans, a group of lizards that includes iguanas, anguimorphs, and, closest to mosasaurs, the snakes. You may have noticed that these animals have forked tongues, even bearded dragons do. Look at that, that's cool. For a long time, mosasaurs were considered poorly adapted to oceanic life, but now we know that many were very well adapted and remarkably similar in appearance to early whales. You may notice that the tail fluke is larger on the bottom, the opposite condition of sharks. This is so that the animals can go up faster than they can go down. This works very well for animals that breathe air. Sharks, on the other hand, are basically water airplanes and need to balance out their lift so they can go straight at high speeds. The Mosasaurus relaxing is adorable, especially considering that its appearance in the beginning implied that it had nothing that could possibly stand up to it in its own domain. And then we get jump scared by a rival Mosasaurus. Mosasaurus have long been known to bite each other in the face, so this is valid. The fight scene is admittedly very cool to watch, but I do wish their theme was a little more aquatic and royal sounding. Although I might have actually preferred seeing Mosasaur jaw kinematics in action than a fight scene. By that I mean how the lower jaw in Mosasaurus has a second point of articulation. That's a cool thing. Either way, the big boy has defended his territory and has returned to a state of absolute bliss. Iconic slay. The next segment begins with a moon jump scare. Okay. That's right, this is the Darren Naish special, Ammonite Hour. Ammonites were a domineering presence in the Earth's oceans since they emerged, so they're of great importance to include in any paleo documentary taking place before the end of the Cretaceous. It's sometimes difficult to get across that ammonites were just as commonplace as fish, squid, or shrimp-like devices are today. The design used in this episode is clearly inspired by firefly squid. Like the Barbaridactylus, I find this to be a bit disrespectful. Let me explain. It comes across as though the animals in question didn't have enough going on to warrant being in the episode, and so had to have random bits added on to them. It's not too out of left field, as many unrelated organisms sport bioluminescence, but they're still rather one-to-one with firefly squid. I do like how the narration clarifies that the lights normally attract plankton, as, if I understand correctly, all true ammonites were basically filter feeders. I should also add that nautili are not ammonites, and the fleshy hoods that shield nautili are not a basal trait. The anatomy of true ammonites is poorly understood, but they seem to have withdrawn into their shells by using their beaks as shields. The odd structure is called an aptychus, and it biologically equates to the lower jaw. I would have loved to see this odd anatomical quirk be displayed in 3D animation. The number of tentacles ammonites had is under debate, but they tentatively had 10 as seen here. I also appreciate how it lets the viewer know that females are much larger than males. This is the case with many animals, since female gametes are, by definition, larger than the males, and larger body size means more eggs can fit. But ammonites can become extremely sexually dimorphic. If the suture lines of their shells weren't diagnostic, we might not notice that some females are many times larger than males and resemble entirely separate species. Another addition I like is the inclusion of shells washing up en masse. It really hits home just how big of a role in oceanic ecosystems ammonites played, that thousands of corpses may wash up at once and be nothing new. After that moon jump scare, the sun rises gently and its lack of a baby face is greatly appreciated. Here we return to the Tyrannosaurus, which reminds me, Attenborough says Tyrannosaurs instead of Tyrannosaurus. This is a bit of a pet peeve of mine. Just because some taxonomic groups are named for family members doesn't mean that Tyrannosaur is a shortening of Tyrannosaurus. Tyrannosaurus is a tyrannosaur, which means tyrannosaurid. In this case, tyrannosaurs aren't a thing. It's just an unhelpful way to shorten the name Tyrannosaurus in a way that unnecessarily muddies the use of cladistic names. Calling it an Elasmosaur is fine, since it is an elasmosaurid plesiosaur, but a tyrannosaur is not a thing. It is a Tyrannosaurus. Moving on from that digression, the long-necky flap-flaps are long-necking and flap-flapping. I will say that they seem to be moving far too fast through the water for how little they're moving, but that's a pretty minor nitpick. Also, in case you were wondering, there's a common explanation that their necks are long to sneak up on shoals of fish. This is true, but oversimplified to the point of being misleading. Their necks are long so that their jaws are as far from their source of propulsion as possible. This means that fish can't use their lateral lines to sense the water disturbed by their predators swimming. If you imagine the lateral line acting like an ear, it's as if the elasmosaurids are using their necks to reach their prey before the sound reaches them. Assuming this is the same female and calf, 1.5 years have passed since the baby is now 2 years old.
She and her 2-year-old calf.
Lore? Is this lore I smell? You mean to tell me that Nigel, Marvin, and the crew have been out here filming for a year and a half? A Mosasaur appears and is mobbed off by the group of Tyrannosaurus. This both echoes how cetaceans defend themselves from predators and shows that predatory animals aren't relentless monsters. Good job. This all might sound overly speculative, but plesiosaurs are known to not only give birth to live young, but carry a single baby at a time. This strongly implies other K-selected strategies such as parental care. The idea of a non-bird, non-mammalian reptile caring for a single baby for years at a time is an absolutely fascinating concept. The ability to form bonds like that could very well extend to mates or even extended family, as shown here. While still fairly speculative, it's a fun idea. I really like how the mother helps keep the baby's head above the water while the other Tyrannosaurs pace around them. It is precious. And with that closes the first episode. It ended a bit suddenly and somewhat anticlimactically. It was also an odd choice for the first episode to mostly be about marine organisms. In fact, the only dinosaur actually in this episode was Tyrannosaurus. It started off very strong and subverted a lot of paleoart tropes while still doing new and exciting things, such as the swimming Tyrannosaurus and the chillless Mosasaurus. The Tyrannosaurus may have overstayed their welcome, but I think that's mostly because their inflexibility as creatures makes them kind of boring to watch. I did enjoy them holding themselves vertical in a similar manner to how sperm whales sleep, though. Seeing them defend themselves successfully was also a refreshing take on long-necked plesiosaurs. The Ammonite section was a little weak in my opinion, but I know Season 2 does a much better job of displaying the sheer abundance and diversity of Ammonites. The swimming Tyrannosaurus was definitely the highest high in this episode. Under the assumption that I'm going to review other paleo media that's significantly worse than this, I'm going to give Prehistoric Planet Episode 1 a solid 8 out of 10.
Surely, one of the baby turtles